Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe.
And we're back. Welcome to episode 77 of Time to Teach. Today's episode is entitled Understanding Impulsivity. This is definitely a topic that has me intrigued because I have little ones, and while I think some impulsivity comes with that young age, there are also other things that can contribute to it. So I've been on a personal mission to really understand more about it. So if you're interested, why don't you join me? Okay, so this will probably be a two-part episode, just because, as always, I really want to talk about how to work with impulsivity, but I think before we can get to that point, it's really important to understand more about impulsivity. So today I'm really just kind of not even taking a deep dive, more like scratching the surface, because there's definitely a lot more to learn. But today's episode is just going to be kind of defining it, understanding, more about it, what it might look like, what the experts say about it. So to help me with that, I'm going to be relying a lot on an article that is on online that I found, www.understood.org. The title, and of course this will be linked in the show notes, but the title is Understanding Your Child's Trouble with Impulsivity. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, like I said, I am very intrigued by this subject because, with the younger kids, and I do teach younger kids, they can be quite impulsive, but then you have other kids who really their impulsivity is more than what you would typically see at that age. So it appears to look symptomatic of something else that might be happening. And so that's why I'm always interested in my students' behavior. I really feel like if I weren't a teacher, I would love to be a psychologist or a counselor of some type. I don't know, but I'm always intrigued by the behaviors and what those stem from. And a lot of times they are, we know where they stem from because possibly it's neurological, it could be environment factors, it could be a combination, and many times I think they are all combinations. So that's where my interest is at. So let's kind of look at this article. If I pull in another article, which at this point I don't plan to, but I could at any point change that to get more information. Just kind of depends, but I'll let you know if I look at another article. Otherwise, just you can assume it's coming from the understood.org article mentioned already. Okay, so this is how the article kind of begins, like an at a glance, how to know when there's some type of impulsivity or some of the symptoms that you might see. So basically says that impulsive behavior is kind of related to the child's inability to put mental brakes on something before acting. So I think we know when we see this, this might be a student who, when you see it, like, oh, that student is always blurting out in class. I'll be speaking and the student just speaks right over me. And you can tell that the child is having a really difficult time kind of regulating that. It's just very impulsive. Like they feel the need to shout everything out at the moment they're thinking it, at the moment that they want to say it. So it's their inability to put on those mental brakes, even though maybe you've talked to this child a million times about, okay, we raise our hand. But they still present difficulties with being able to put those mental brakes on. It says impulsivity is often a symptom of a brain-based condition like ADHD. Now, it's important to understand that impulsivity, while it is often linked to ADHD, there could be other conditions that are happening. So it looks like ADHD, but it's something else. I think this is often, like, this is really why when there's something going on, we often, when we see that behavior, we're like, oh, it's ADHD. But I think evaluations are really important to pinpoint exactly what's going on, because it can present itself as ADHD, but then actually there's something else happening. So we want to be able to distinguish and determine and decide, I don't know, just felt like throwing in another D word, exactly what's going on. So those are the things that you would see. And then also, if you're seeing impulsivity, you're probably seeing it in, not just one situation, but perhaps multiple situations and scenarios and places. So, maybe the child is impulsive during multiple different types of activities and academics, and at school and at home, or whatever the situation. So you might see that in multiple situations. So let's see. Continuing on. So then the article kind of goes into other things that you may be seeing. So talking about that, the mental breaks, it's expanding. It does go into like blurting things out. But in addition to that, and this could be anything, but just blurting answers out, blurting out as you're talking to the class, anything interrupting people while they are speaking. So it's not just necessarily the teacher, but any person, a child who has difficulty waiting his or her turn to do something, or may engage in doing unsafe activities. It does make a note here that impulsive behavior does not necessarily look the same in every child. So one child's impulsive behavior could look different in another child's impulsive behavior, and also that those symptoms can change as the child gets older. So it's really kind of important to understand that. And this is what I always see, even though I've worked with many students who have presented impulsive behavior, or students who have a same, perhaps even neurological condition. Even though you've worked with multiple students with similar conditions, every child is still different, and they're presenting in a different way. So, even what worked with one child doesn't necessarily work with another child. So I think the more we can understand about these conditions and these behaviors, it just lets us know what to be aware of, but it doesn't, we might have a roadmap to help us and guide us, but we have to understand that there's got to be flexibility on our part, and knowing that, there's not one method that is going to work with all students. And in fact, today's episode is not even going to get into the methods of how to work with students like this. That's, those are next steps and upcoming episodes. But I think we really need to understand what's happening before we can get to that. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of quoting from the article now. So now the article kind of goes into more of what you might be noticing in students and children who present these issues. Okay, so it says the child might do silly or inappropriate things to get other people's attention. So they're attention seeking, okay? There's an intentional part here. They have trouble following the rules consistently, okay? So you might see inconsistency with them following rules. That's important to know. There might be some aggression towards other children, like hitting, kicking, biting. It says that's very common among young kids. Now, when I think of my young kiddos, I will often call my students kiddos, but those students who are struggling with impulsivity, this is definitely something that comes up a lot, is pushing, hitting. A student who struggles with impulsivity becomes upset and will resort to something physical to respond to that. Now, even though a lot of times this might be a neurological condition, or a condition of something else, and while we won't get into how to work with those students in today's episode, I do want to say it's also not a free pass to exhibit those behaviors. Okay, so I want to be very, very clear on that. There needs to be consequences, and there has to be ways that we work towards preventing that. So I don't want to, just because we're better understanding this, I don't want to give the impression that we give a free pass to this because, oh, it's neurological and it's difficult and it's challenging. The implication there is we really need to know what we're working with so that we can help those students really to prevent those kind of behaviors and work with them to better regulate their own actions. But definitely when we see aggressive behavior, it's not a free pass. There has to be consequences, because that also is not okay. So even though we're not going to get into that, I don't want it to seem that the idea is because it might be neurological or something that's really, really challenging for the child that it's like, oh, okay, so that's just what they do. That also is not okay. So let me just make that clear before I continue. Okay, so the article then goes on to say that a child who is struggling with impulsivity has difficulty waiting for his or her turn, really in anything, but it says games and conversation. Waiting his or her turn is just something that's very difficult. Grabs things from people, or pushes in line. Overreacts to frustration, disappointment, mistakes, and criticism. So you can see those students who are, very kind of dramatic. Well, it appears as dramatic. It's an overreaction. So they have difficulty really regulating their behavior when they're experiencing, a feeling that kind of like a negative feeling, I would say. Wants to have the last word and the first turn, doesn't understand how his or her words or behavior affect other people. So I always think about it when I see these students, and I always think like they're just so unaware. They're unaware of how their own behavior is affecting those around them. They're very unaware. They are just super unaware. And they don't understand the consequences of their actions. So basically, those are some of the behaviors that you would see in students who are dealing with impulsive behaviors. And again, like I said, if you're a teacher of young students, of course we see a degree of impulsivity, because I think that just comes with, being a child. But then you begin to notice it when after multiple years and really kind of understanding that age group and knowing that, hey, there are some behaviors in the student that seem, a little more exaggerated than what I would typically see in this age group. And, we got to pay attention to those things. Those behavior always stems from something. I always say that. I don't, we can't just, I just think we do students an injustice when we say, oh, there's a behavior problem, or we just kind of resort it down to, oh, it's their behavior problem, or they've got this or that. There might be behavior issues, but we have to keep in mind that it stems, every behavior is stemming from something, right? It's, it's something, it's either neurological, it's maybe some condition that perhaps has gone undiagnosed. It could also be something emotional. So it can be, an environmental factor that is affecting the student emotionally, but to just say, oh, they're a behavior problem. We just do them a great injustice. We need to get down to the root cause of why is this happening, and that is so that we can better help those students. It's just really, really important. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the next part of the article just kind of goes into potential causes of impulsive behavior. Now, it begins with the most likely cause of impulsive behavior is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It's the most common brain condition in childhood, and it says it affects 8 to 10% of all kids between ages 3 and 17. I personally think that's a huge percentage. And I see it in my class. Every year, I typically have multiple students who either already come to me with a diagnosis, or who present symptoms of possible attention deficit disorder, impulsivity being one symptom. And if you listen to I think it was last week's episode, now I can't even remember, but very recently I did an episode on attention deficit disorder. Hyperactivity is only one one type of attention deficit disorder. You can definitely have other forms of attention. So it's not always, we always think of impulsivity as, the classic attention deficit disorder, but it's really only one type. But definitely, if this article is correct in its percentage, and by the way, you guys, I always encourage you to do your own research. This is one source that I'm looking at on the internet. Definitely, and if you're listening to this, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're already someone who's doing your own research, but I always want to caution that, do your own research and understand this is one source of information, but we definitely want to look at a body of research before we really make any hardcore decisions and conclusions. But 8 to 10% is a large percentage. And like I said, every year I have students who are already diagnosed and or who present symptoms and will typically go through an evaluation. Usually by October, I have a pretty good sense of my students and their behavior, and students who are not diagnosed, I'm seeing things by October. It's hard for me in the beginning because they are so young and they're transitioning from early childhood to the elementary section. So that alone will present certain behaviors that, I have to kind of give students time so I can distinguish between, is it immaturity? Is it the transition from early childhood and the beginning of the year and all of these things? But October, November for sure. But usually by October, I have a good sense if there's a student who's presenting symptoms, and I'm starting to think of kids at that time who I'm, might need to have a talk with mom and dad and have that very difficult conversation about, possibly looking deeper into what could be happening. So that's I guess that would make sense why, if there's 8 to 10%. And it does say boys are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls. So I don't know if this article goes into that, but I think one article that I've read goes into how more girls who do have attention deficit might have the more quiet type, the inattentive type. So this would be like the daydreaming, or, those kids who they're easier to miss because they're quiet. But So their symptoms are more quiet. You might not see the impulsive or the hyperactive part, but they're the ones who are still distracted. They might be distracted by their thoughts. So I don't know that it's this article, and I don't see it discussing that. So maybe it was another article, but I believe that's why girls are more likely to have that sort of inattentive type of ADD. Okay, so let's see. It says some kids with ADHD act and speak without thinking because their brain works differently than those who don't have it. I think this is another reason why we really need to understand and not, I don't want to say cut those kids some slack, but kind of. So again, this doesn't mean that their actions don't have consequences. They need to have consequences. But in terms of when we adults and educators understand that, hey, this is a neurological condition, their brains are actually a little different than maybe the neurotypical brain. That's the part of the brain that's meant to regulate impulsivity and things like that is underdeveloped. It's developing at a slower rate than, say, a neurotypical brain. When we understand that, I think we can be, we're still going to experience it. It can feel frustrating. I'm going to be very honest. It's very frustrating when I'm trying to teach and there's those, the impulsive student who speaks over me, but really understanding that it's a condition that is stemmed from the brain being developed a little bit differently. It helps me. I have more compassion for those students. So I think that's why we want to understand that. And we have to practice patience. It's definitely difficult, but we have to practice patience. And that's why we need to understand what's happening. And then it goes on to say that's often why those students who have ADHD, they're going to appear more immature than the other students. And you'll get this if you think about those students who are impulsive, those students who have ADHD, they're more immature. And this is why, because their brains truly are not where the other brains are. They're progressing, at least the part that's in charge of the impulsive and the regulating. That part is not developed quite as a neurotypical brain is. So we need to understand that. So that's why you're going to see an immaturity. And then the article goes on to saying, while some children's symptoms may lessen as they get older, that's not the case for most kids. I think that word is very telling, most kids. I know I always hear, or maybe I don't always hear, but I frequently hear like, oh, you grow out of ADHD. And I don't really think that's necessarily the case. I mean, maybe some kids actually do, and it does say that there's, in this article anyway, it does say that their symptoms lessen, but I think as students grow older, if their symptoms are changing, that's could be part of it. But also I think if they are getting help, especially, they're going to be developing strategies, and those strategies are helping them to cope with some of those weak areas. And I think maybe that's what's really happening. I don't know. And I'm not an expert. I do actually listen to ADHD podcasts because I am someone who really seeks to understand, and especially understand my students better. So anyway, I don't know. I would be interested in knowing the actual percentage of, do kids actually grow out of this? But from what I read and understand, I really think that percentage is smaller compared to students who do not outgrow this. Then it goes on to say there are strategies you can use at home and supports that can be used at school to help your child control those impulses. Okay, next important thing, there are other conditions that have impulsivity as a symptom. Again, this is why we really cannot jump to the conclusion that when we see a child who struggles with impulsivity to just chalk it up to, that child must have ADHD. That could be. According to this article, it almost it most times is. So even though that might be, that it could possibly be, we cannot rule other conditions out. So so the article now goes into other conditions. So it says, and kids can also have more than one condition. And this is definitely true if it is ADHD. A lot of times that comes with another condition. Here are some learning issues that cause impulsive behavior in children. Language or communication disorders or delays in language development. I've definitely seen this to be true with my kiddos who have had certain language or communication disorders. So it says kids with difficulties communicating may act impulsively or seem impulsive. They may not understand directions, so they don't wait for instructions to be given and just act instead. Or they may act out because they're frustrated that others can't understand them. Some kids may not understand how conversation works, so they may not know when to stop talking or how to stay on topic. So that's important to understand, that when a child is dealing with a language disorder, there could be great frustration. So of course, if you're feeling frustrated, you're going to act out. So again, this is why it's so important that we try to distinguish what's happening. Now, this goes into executive functioning issues. To me, it's really interesting that it separates this from attention deficit, because a lot of what I've been learning about attention deficit disorder is that it's really kind of a disorder of executive functions. So I almost link it with attention deficit, but I don't know, maybe this is just a sign that I need to better understand this. But I almost think more of, when I think of attention deficit disorder, I think of it as a disorder of executive functions. I don't think of these as two separate things. So it's interesting that it does separate it underneath the attention deficit, but I don't know. Like I said, maybe I just need to learn more about why it's doing that. Okay, so here's what it says. Executive functions are a group of mental skills that help us organize and act on information. One of these skills is impulse control. If your child is weak in this area, he may have a hard time controlling how he behaves. Executive dysfunction isn't usually considered its own disorder, but it often occurs with learning and attention issues. So learning issues and attention. So maybe it is kind of linking it with attention deficits, because that's, like I said, what I definitely think of is those executive functioning issues that go along when a student has attention deficit. You're going to see it in their executive functioning, and that's the planning, the organizing, the prioritizing. These students will be they have difficulty finding their materials. They lose their materials all the time. Yeah, just very, very difficult, because those are the things that we need to function on a daily basis. So you can see where it's like attention deficit. And again, I'm linking this with executive functions, but those are things you need to manage every day of your life. So it becomes almost like a life managing skill set, which is why it can be very difficult for a child who's suffering with that, to manage their everyday life. Okay, so that the article does go on, but it's talking more about, its audience is really supposed to be parents, so it talks to the parents about how to seek more information. I guess I will go into that because I do realize that I have some parents who listen to the show. So definitely, if you're seeing these types of behaviors, you definitely do want to seek out answers. So this is what the article suggests that you can do. Talk with your child's teacher. And I would say also, if you're a teacher, talk to the child's parents, because one thing that I always want to know is, are the same behaviors that I'm seeing at school being exhibited at home? And so likewise, if you're a parent, you want to know, is that, are these behaviors presented in my child's classroom as well? Talk with your child's doctor. Okay, it says take your journal or notes so you can discuss what you've been seeing. The doctor will likely want to rule out medical causes for your child's impulsivity. This may include testing for things like ADHD and communication disorders. The doctor may also refer you to a specialist, such as a developmental behavioral pediatrician, for some of this testing. Consult with specialists. There are a number of specialists who might help you find out what's behind your child's impulsivity. A neurologist might look for a brain-based medical issues, including ADHD. A speech pathologist would look for language disorders, and a mental health professional might look for anxiety or depression. They may also recommend that you have your child evaluated by a learning specialist. Look into an educational evaluation. You or your child's teacher can request that the school evaluate your child. This is to see how his issues are affecting his learning. Depending on the results, your child may be able to get supports to meet his needs. Those might include social skills training and a rewards-based behavior plan. If the school agrees to do it, the evaluation will be free. I don't know how every school manages this, and I know less after so many years working in a private school in Mexico. In the last 10 years, I've worked with 2 different schools, and I actually think my previous school, I don't know what their steps were, because I don't really think they had a great way to handle any child who was not, neurotypical. But definitely in this current school where I'm at, I feel like we have some pretty solid steps that are very beneficial in helping to get answers when we start seeing symptoms and we need answers. The first step we do is we would go ahead and request for screening at our school, and they will do their own screening, and if anything comes out of that, that's when there would be a recommendation that then the child would be evaluated, do like an educational psychological evaluation. So then we can get down to some more answers about what's happening and where might there be deficits. And a lot of times it's not just deficits, you're going to find strengths, because a lot of these, so remember, this is not these kind of things does not mean that the child has low intelligence. Oftentimes these students are very intelligent, and you'll know it too. You'll be like, hey, this student, you can see like, hey, this student makes connections maybe before any other student, or their connections are deeper. But you're going to start noticing things that, especially with the impulsivity. And again, like it says, it's often accompanied with something else. They might just be impulsive. And then in some areas, they might, doing the production piece, producing something might be challenging. And that's where we need answers as to why is that happening, so that we know how to work with that child, and so that the parents know too, because we need everyone on board. Okay. So that's pretty much it, you guys. The article does go on to say what you can do right now. I'm really not going to get much into that. Kind of goes beyond what today's episode was really more about, just understanding impulsivity. So basically, we just kind of talked about how a lot of times impulsivity could be a symptom of ADHD, but it could be another condition like a speech disorder or some type of issue with speech communication. And also, if you're seeing these signs, you want to check in with your child's teacher, or if you are the teacher, your child's, your student's parents, just kind of see where else are these symptoms presented, if it's in other scenarios as well. It's important for us to understand that. And then of course, getting a screening and or evaluation to really get a full picture of what's happening. So that's it, you guys. I will be doing an upcoming episode that now looks at how to work with students who have impulsive issues. So that will be up and coming. I don't know if it will be this next episode or later. I also want to take an opportunity to tell you that in a couple of weeks, I will be on spring break. So as you know, whenever I am on a break at school, Time to Teach is on a break. It's healthy. I really need that time for me so that I can, do what I need to do. And yeah, I do that. So that will be coming. I need to look at the calendar and figure out exactly when. So I want to let you know that will be happening. Time to Teach will be on spring break, but as always, when I return to school, Time to Teach will return, maybe not immediately, but soon following. And then before we know it, it will be summer break. That is so crazy. The school year has flown by. Okay, you guys, that is it. I'm going to now move on to the wins and fails segment of the week. So, win for the week. I would definitely say win for the week is I got I can't say a new laptop, but my previous laptop that I was using, and it's issued by the school, was just, I don't know, it's been very, very slow. And also my webcam wasn't working. So I had the tech center fix that for me, but what they did is they were able to replace it with a different laptop. So that's been kind of nice because now I have a working webcam, and this laptop is still kind of slow. I mean, it's not the best laptop in the world. Same brand as my last one, so it's not super speedy, but I think it might be faster than, my last one. So that's definitely a win. Fail for the week is, you guys, I've really, really been struggling with Words Their Way. A few weeks ago, I don't know if I've ever even talked about the fact that we teach Words Their Way for word work, and I don't hate it, but I just kind of struggle with the fact that I don't know, we teach it for the reading and spelling of word patterns, but I've not seen that their spelling transfers into writing. I just feel so frustrated by that. And I've been very intentional in making sure that when they read, they're also many times writing the patterns. So it's just kind of frustrating to me to not see it transfer. It's just, I don't know, just kind of, that part is challenging and frustrating. So I've been kind of now in my small groups during word work, instead of just focusing only on Words Their Way, I'm also using that time to focus on spelling patterns from their leveled readers, because I feel like that's actually giving them more access to the next type of, leveled reader for them to go to. So yeah, there's that part. I'm just feeling frustrated. I want to, and I know it's a different level. It's one thing to be able to read the pattern, and a deeper level to be able to spell the pattern. But yeah, it's just frustrating. But the way that you assess Words Their Way is you give them a spelling test on the patterns. And then if they don't pass it, you keep them on that word pattern. But to me, I feel like that's at a disadvantage to them because they can read it, and I want them to access the next type of spelling pattern because they need that for their reading. So the frustrating part is the way we assess it. We assess their spelling of it when I need them to have access to read it so they can progress in reading. I don't know. I just feel like there's a disconnect, and I haven't been able to figure it out. So I'm definitely looking to you guys if you are someone who, I don't know, if Words Their Way is working for you. I'd love to hear because I don't know if it's something that I'm doing, if it's the Words Their Way itself, or if it's just life in general. I don't know. But in anyway, Words Their Way, or if you want to reach out to me about something else, I can be reached primarily on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at TammyJ123. That's at TAMIJ123. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.